Happy afternoon, everyone. So glad to have you here with us on TechBeat in this awesome segment. I'm joined in the studio today with the formidable Cyd Tetro. I'm going to come back around to Cyd and do a formal intro here in a moment. I am super excited to have her today on TechBeat. Welcome to TechBeat, where leaders learn, innovate, and grow. I am your host, Earl Foote, founder, CEO of Nexus IT. Want to remind everybody that these segments of TechBeat are now available on all major podcast platforms. We'd love your subscription, but more than anything, there's a massive amount of very useful content for leaders and founders out there. I specifically do TechBeat, one, to tell founder stories, and two, to help other founders and leaders learn from those founders and grow their businesses. Go out, subscribe, consume these podcasts wherever you're at, in audio or video format. We'll keep an eye on any of your comments or questions throughout the hour, and at the end of the hour, we'll try to get to some of those if it makes sense. So feel free to be posting questions on whatever platform you're joining us from. Post questions and or comments there. Let's see. Just want to also remind everybody that in the coming weeks, we've got Nate Randall, Tara Spalding, Romaine Marshall, Francis Pedraza, and Trina Limpert coming up on TechBeat. So keep an eye out for announcements on dates and times for that. All right, let's get to the lady of the hour. Again, my esteemed guest, Cyd Tetro. Cyd is the CEO of Brandless. She is an innovator of experience, a growth leader, technologist, STEM advocate, author, and speaker. Brandless is a mission-driven omnichannel commerce platform that is growing through technology and the acquisition of mission-driven brands. Cyd is also the founder and president of Women's Tech Council. She holds a master's degree in business administration and a bachelor in computer science from BYU. Cyd, welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Such a pleasure to have you here in studio today, in the Silicon Slopes podcast studio, which, what a great facility. We're happy that they're a great partner and always give us access when we need this. So, look, Cyd, I just want to start out kind of helping the audience get to know you, Cyd, as an individual, the backstory behind, how you grew up, where you grew up, what led to you becoming, a leader that is really one of the most, let's just put it out there. You're one of the most revered leaders in Utah right now, and rightfully so. Maybe, share your story, your life and leadership journey and story from wherever you want to start up to now.
Okay, you set the bar really high for who I am. It's an interesting thing as you reflect on the careers that you build, because they come step by step, and you you're headed down this path, but it's hard to appreciate all of the things that they build. And then when you look back, I still feel like I'm in the midst of building and I have not yet arrived. So to hear you describe me that way, right, that's a very high bar, because I really do feel like I'm in this place where I've made a couple of things a priority as I've built my career. And that's really created these opportunities. And I think then reinforces the things that I think are important. At the core of who I am, I think of myself as a technologist. When I had this really early opportunity when I was coming through junior high and high school, where people recognized that I was just really good at math. So math and critical thinking have always been skills. And this led to really interesting conversations early in the days when you're not really thinking of a career, but where people were encouraging me and supporting me in pathways that really exposed me to technology. It was a really new discipline when I was in school. And I had an opportunity to be an intern for a software company when I was a senior in high school. And that was probably the moment that really turned my career. Like, I always knew I was going to do business. I was already kind of in the more engineering disciplines, but I got just this little exposure to what could be possible in innovation. And it really set a course for me. And I don't even think I realized at the time that there were a few women in the field. It didn't even actually cross my mind.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh yeah, I know that, in my like math curriculum, there's very few women, but I don't think I deeply appreciated that, because I had so many people around me who were like, hey, it's fine. Like, you can just do that. So I went to college on an engineering scholarship. I only lasted in the engineering program one semester before I decided to move over to computer science. But even in my journey of computer science, I would say I didn't exactly know where it was going to take me, but what I knew is I was learning something that was going to be really valuable in the future. For me, that's become a common theme of how I've thought about things, which is I really don't know exactly what the end destination is, but what I know is when opportunity comes and you have access to be able to learn something new, that it's going to open doors that you cannot foresee. For me, that's become this consistent theme where how do I not become my own limiting factor because I'm fearful or I'm worried about things. And so I started to take this approach in college, probably not fully intentional,
Yeah.
but then it became this thread throughout the course of my career. I remember even in my computer science pathway, I was headed into my junior year. I was like, I don't know. Can I do this? Can I finish this operating system class and my database class and all of these really hard classes? And I had this conversation with a lot of my mentors, and it was really this idea that said, if you finish this technical degree, you will have doors that open. You don't know what they are today, but it is well worth the time spent. And I just decided I was like going to finish that degree and really because of the support of all those people. So I finished a technical degree and then I still didn't know what I should do. But in college, when I finished my undergrad, I did 100 job interviews. And I put
Wow.
resume in with every person who was interviewing because I really didn't know what I should go do.
Yeah.
I also took the GMAT and the GRE and applied to grad school because I figured something was going to turn up. And this is just a consistent theme. If you shut your own doors, none of those opportunities come.
Yeah, of course.
So I did all these job interviews, and half of them I'm like, I'm never taking that job. Okay, good thing I went and did that
What a great
interview.
learning
Never going
experience.
down that.
Yeah.
That's right. And then there were some that I flew all over the country for some interviews, and it happened that I got my acceptance to the MBA program and a job offer from a company the same week. And I went to the company and I said, "I'd love to come work for you, but will you work with my daytime MBA schedule?" And they said yes. So I ended up when I came out of college jumping straight into my master's program, and I had worked in tech all during my undergrad and working full time. And so we got married like 3 days before that. I jumped in. I would go to school 8 to noon, do my group study noon to 4, and then work the 5 to 10 or 11 shift for 6 days a week.
Was
And
this at Novell?
this was at
Okay.
Novell.
All right.
I had many offers from them, but there was one particularly in technical support, which ended up being a really interesting path for me because it was so technical. We were like hex editing databases of the world's largest companies, but it also quickly led to me starting to travel all over the world and be their trainer on directory services and build the first $1 billion directory service based on LDAP, which is still the protocol today of directory services.
Yeah.
And it really also it was at the time when Novella and Microsoft were head to head competitors. I had this experience of just like learning exactly what it meant to create category positioning and be in very competitive markets and then travel all over the world and have this customer facing experience of being really at the forefront of leading technology at the time. And that started to set a path for me of I love innovation. I love leading edge technology. I love the opportunity to solve really big problems and do that in really creative ways with great people. And I also love interacting with customers. I didn't want to ever have a career where it was just behind the scenes. I wanted the forward facing side.
You're not like the typical technologist like me that's introverted and would rather just be in the dark.
That's right. But now but that's not true. We've got this podcast right here
Yeah.
along the
Yeah.
way.
This is me stretching outside of my outside of myself. But okay, so very very fascinating kind of journey here, and particularly, I think some of the things that really stick out to me are having this open mindset, a growth mindset, a um, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take kind of mindset. So let me just try everything and keep my options open and see what's available to me in the world and where this is all going to go, right?
That's right.
Really cool. I mean, of course, I'm a technologist myself as well, and just kind of cool to see your journey of going from a computer science student and early career, and now let's talk a little bit about how that transitions from that technologist sort of role more into leadership and
Mhm.
business. Yeah.
So, I finished my master's program. I was very sure I was going to be a management consultant. I was like president of the management consulting club. I was like, that is the path that I was going. And I did all of these interviews. And at the last minute, I had these reflections on what are going to end up being my life priorities. There's career, but it's never just career. for me, I have 3 pillars. It's around the career that I'm building, it's about community, and it's about family. And how do those 3 things play together? And what trade-offs am I willing to make at different stages of my life that have different opportunities? And I had this realization that if I took the management consulting career path, I was going to be on the road 5 or 6 days a week. And I didn't have any kids at the time, but I just wasn't sure that that was the path I was going to do. So I ended up pathwaying into product management and then building a career for a number of years really around product management, which had these consistent themes that I cared about. But a couple of years into that, I jumped to my first startup. So I didn't come my dad has his own practice. So that is very entrepreneurial, but it's different. You don't talk like tech entrepreneurs do
Yeah.
in that ecosystem. But at the time, every one of my colleagues that I was working with were jumping to startups. I'm like, I think I should be jumping to a startup. There's like really interesting opportunity there. So I jumped to a
This
startup,
is
which was called Next.
90s,
This was in the 2000s.
2000s. Okay. Yeah.
Jumped to a company called Next Page. And I ended up going to an amazing team of leaders who also saw potential in me and fast path my track to the executive suite. Within a handful of years, I'd gone from being a vice president into the C-suite, being part of the fundraising ecosystem, part of acquisitions that we had acquired, all the new product validation,
You're
and
probably
just
late 20s at this time.
mhm.
Yeah, and that's a quick
It
path.
was
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was really fast, and when you look back on it, you really think about how you need people in past that create opportunities. For me, that's become a reflection in my responsibility now as I build companies. How do I help people move their careers faster?
Yeah.
How do I open more doors, give more access, give more opportunity in the balancing of things? And so that put me on this leadership one. And a couple interesting things about my career path is I haven't stayed in one discipline. So I didn't come through this and say, okay, I'm staying in networking and I'm going to stay in that for my entire career. Pretty much every job that I have had has been an entire new technology discipline, an entire new ecosystem that I had to learn, but a whole set of new opportunities that came because I was willing to do something really far outside my comfort zone or my domain expertise at the time. And that has created a vast array of experience that I then get to apply and expand in every opportunity.
Yeah. Wow. So cool. Um, a couple of quick things that kind of stand out to me, and there's some other things about you said that I wanna delve into and highlight. But um, uh, I find that really good leaders and founders stay hungry and stay humble, right? And they never feel like they're done. You talked about I'm just still building, right? And we had this quick little conversation, before we started the segment here, about how people come up to you all the time and say comments like, "Oh man, you really got it figured out. Things are really going," and you're like, "I'm just hustling like everybody else,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do my thing, right? Just trying to build, and I don't feel like I'm even halfway there just yet. Even though there might be, a pretty decent wake of accomplishments, behind you. But having that kind of greenfield sort of,
Yep.
mindset or mentality of um, there's still so much more to do, right? And leaning into that. You talk about building people. Um, that has been definitely one of the I would say the hallmarks of what I've learned in business and leadership, and one of the things that I try most to do, enable access to development for people. The quicker you can develop people, the more your business will grow, the better it will do. Some of those people will graduate out of your organization. That's okay, right?
Yep.
It's okay. You help them, find a great career somewhere else. Sometimes your paths converge again. We have multiple, members of our team that are on a second tour of duty with us, right?
Absolutely.
So you just never know, right? What happens? I know a lot of employers they're scared to develop people because they think that they'll leave, right? And that just it's not uh, the mindset isn't quite right.
Yep.
The more you enable access and open doors to people, the better your organization will do, right?
Uh-huh.
There's no doubt about that. So let's come back here real quick and talk about something that I know that's near and dear to your heart, and that you started quite some time ago, and that's
Yep.
that's Women Tech Council. Tell us a little bit about that, and that journey, and what that means to you, and what the mission is, and how you engage in the community there, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think we started that organization 15 years ago. you come through the pathways and you're like, okay, there's 3 women in my graduating class, right? I didn't really have any female colleagues or peers in the early stage of my career. And I sat down and I happened to go to lunch with some other women who are working in tech fields. We had this conversation around what would happen if we could increase the number of women in tech and what should we focus on if we were going to do this? So I come out of engineering, right, computer science, and I really embrace the agile development mindset. I think everything in my life is test optimized. Like, I don't know, we should validate that. We have some good ideas, we have some bad ideas. Should we do that? That became our approach for the Women Tech Council. Like, we don't know if this is a good idea. Let's go validate with a bunch of people.
Yeah.
So we go out and we talk to government, we talk to education, we talk to venture, we talk to CEOs of companies, we talk to women. Like, if we build this, what would be the most important thing to focus on? We got this charter that said, let's focus on the economic impact of women in tech. And that became our foundation, focused on mentoring, networking, opportunity, and visibility for women in tech, from high school to the boardroom. Now, what's interesting about the Women Tech Council is the thing we're really good at is programs. Like, we can develop sustainable programs. I think it's part of this test and optimize model. Like, where do we need to make the most impact? What would do the thing that would make such a difference for individuals and our community and change the future for others? And so then we just take those down. We're like, oh, well, if you want to attack the pipeline problem, you need more young women in STEM. How are you going to get more young women in STEM? Oh, they don't know any mentors or role models. Could we step in and introduce them to all these fabulous women that we've met? We can probably do that. Creates the She Tech program, which over the years now has had more than 30,000 young women go through it.
Yeah.
And at the awards this year, there were women who stood on stage who said, I came into this path because I got introduced to tech through that program.
Yeah.
Like, that for me is why you create meaningful things. I think it's true in what you were just talking about people development. At the end of the day, we have 2 things. We have time and we have talent. And the question we're always asking is, how do we use those? What are the places that we step into? Because we have finite time. How are you using the time and the priorities that are most important at any given stage in your world? And then how are you using your talents to help those people around you? And different times in your career, you're at different places where your talents can be used to lift. And I saw this opportunity as I look back at it to say, we can make a difference. And I couldn't have told you where it would lead. I couldn't even have told you that I expected to meet thousands of women along that path, but I have. And that in turn has allowed me to even think about when I hire into companies, how do I have a more diverse set of friends or networks that know people that pull along? And in turn, how do I create this platform that isn't about me, but it is about a community that if you create elevation for, they in turn help other people who help other people who move everything faster. And I really just think I felt this kind of almost calling to say, I can activate the people in the community to help all of the community do better things. And I can create sustainable programs with great people that in turn can make generational changes for the community. Half of our population works, equally men and women. If we can put more women in places where they make more money, they have an opportunity to impact innovation and the problems that we're solving for the world. That will mean that they help communities, they help their families, they change the trajectories of the places that they live, and they change the state and the nation and the world. That's what we want for people. So in the Women Tech Council, I get to do that. When you're a leader of a company, the way that you approach the people who work for you and what you're willing to give them, it's meaningful. And
Yeah.
the bar I kind of set for myself, I don't believe everyone loves me, but is if someone works for me, would they, and I leave or they leave into another opportunity, would they want to come back? Would they ever work for me again? And I generally feel like if the answer is yes, I did something to recognize their talents, give them opportunity in their environment, or give them feedback to make them better, such that they're on a path where they get to make the difference for what they believe is most important in their life.
Yeah. So cool. So many amazing, really great lessons there. First of all, just recognizing the impact that you and your vision has had on the talent pool and the diversity of that talent pool, and attracting female technologists, just females in general into
Right.
STEM careers, right? Which in Utah 15 years ago wasn't very common. Even today, it's still not super common, but we're doing much better than we
That's
were
right.
15 years ago, and most definitely due to leaders and initiatives like what you've led. And um, you know that leads me to kind of just think about so much of the world and society in general, we complain about what's wrong, and we shirk away from doing anything about it. Right?
Right.
We like to complain. We don't necessarily like to take action. And extraordinary leaders, again, are leaders who step into action. They see a need, they see a gap, they see an opportunity, and they say, "What can I do to influence this? How can
Yeah.
I leverage my time and my talents to help solve a problem here?" So just kudos and thank you. I mean,
Oh, thank
that's
you.
that your influence has played a significant role in a shifting market in Utah, in our ability as employers to be able to hire more diverse talent. And by the way, for employers out there, it is scientifically proven that more diverse teams perform better,
That's right.
bar none. That when you have diversity of perspective and thought and viewpoint and background, your teams will perform better. You will be more innovative, and your business will do better. So, that's really fantastic. Sid, let's talk a little bit about now. You've had this journey, a very remarkable career, going from entry level, on the technology side to fast tracking into leadership, being part of several companies, being on boards such as Select Health and IHC, being an advisor to PE funds like Mercado, right? And then roughly 18 months ago, you step into this role as CEO of Brandless,
Mhm.
um, make an initial massive statement, raising the largest female-led round in Utah history of $118 million for Brandless. Um, and in 18 months, taking Brandless from a low eight-figure company to a nine-figure company.
Yeah.
That's all pretty ambitious and pretty remarkable. So, round of applause for you and for that.
Thank you.
Tell us about that. That's got to be a whirlwind. I mean, tell us a little bit about that journey and just kind of the vision and where you started and what it all means now.
Whirlwind is a correct term, right? It's interestingly probably the most intense and complex company I've done in all the ones that I've done along the way, partially because of the whirlwind of the time. When we in the summer of 2020, we had merged a company with a holding company. And so I found myself the question I often ask, which is what should I do next? And as I've gone further in my career, that decision for me always comes down to opportunity cost. Where are you willing to spend your time for what you think can make an impact and a difference and whatever your goals are? That is really what we're all trying to do at every time we have this decision point, what we're trying to do. And I knew a couple of things were super important to me. One was I wanted to work with really good people. And that was probably my very top thing. I wanted to work with investors and a board that I thought were world class and that I thought could help create acceleration. The way you build great companies is with great people. And it really is great people around you willing to open doors that you don't have access to or that are further reaching than what your own are.
Yeah,
Because you need that. That's just how we build things.
absolutely.
And which is why I think people and networks are so important because you never know where you will run into people again. And you should have an abundance mentality, as you were talking about before.
Mm.
You will run into people again. My friends from my very first job, they're still friends today. I still see them. I was actually at one of the downtown hotels a couple weeks ago. There's a gentleman that I met back then. We haven't seen each other in like 15 years, and we happened to walk into the same place. We're just still connected that way.
Yeah.
And so it was really important to me to work with a great group of people in a place that I thought had tremendous growth opportunity. Because there's different stages of companies you go to. When you start a startup from the ground up, that you're in that game for 7 to 10 years. And there's all this other risk equation. I knew that I wanted something that had a little bit of a foundation and momentum, but that by putting the right structure in can have an amazing opportunity for growth.
Yep.
And so I happened to run into James Clark at we sat on a common board and he and I have known each other for a number of years. I'm like, trying to figure out what to do with my life. It's consistent. And James said, well, come in and talk to me and look at this. And so I jumped in and we started having these conversations around what could be possible. How fast could we make this go? What is it in front of us that could really change that aligns with all of our objectives? And I just jumped in and not very often do I take a long time to make decisions.
Hmm.
Like if I feel like these elements are right, because it's going to lead to something that I learn and I have an opportunity for. And if I love the people that we're doing, I love the idea that we can build around, let's just go do that. So I jumped in. And like you said, within 6 months, we had done a really large round. The thing I'm going to say about that round is I don't want it to hold the record.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, what I really want are many women shattering that same record and creating growth, because that means we are, swinging those doors wide open on fundraising for women. When I think about what we did with that fundraise, there's a couple of things I think are true. One is raising capital is hard. We both know this, right? Doesn't matter who you are, raising capital in businesses are hard.
Absolutely. And
Raising
right now it's harder than ever before. Well, not ever before, but it's very hard.
That's right. And now we're in a condition where raising capital is even harder, and the world is moving significantly to debt versus equity. There's all sorts of changes in the ecosystem. But raising capital as a female is also much harder.
Yeah.
And so you add those complexities to it. What you realize is, in order to accomplish a raise like that, it means that you have to have a tremendous network around you and a lot of allies who help you amplify it and elevate that and expand it. And that's really what happened in that is you find yourself aligned with people who are really great allies, partners, colleagues, and not just in voice, but in action. The thing that you collectively do together goes so much further. And that's probably just a call to all of us. Like, are we the people who show up for everyone else, who makes them go faster? That's what we should do. And in this case, that's what happened. We had a tremendous group around me in the executive team and our investors and everyone who's like, okay, what are the doors we're going to open? How are we going to go get this? We're all working together in the same thing. And it came together really quickly. And then over the last 12 months, that put us on a journey. We did 6 acquisitions in 12 months. That is a tremendous amount of acquisitions, integrations, and operations.
A lot.
And you have to
We're in the midst of one right now, and let me tell you, it's no small lift.
It is no small lift.
Yeah.
And the lift isn't just in acquiring, it's in all the operations post.
It's all the integration work and
all
the cultural integration of those people, and
Exactly.
realigning teams and leadership and reporting relationships and all that stuff.
That's right. And all the people things that are so critical
Yeah.
to make sure that you continue to grow those organizations. And so that's what we really embarked on. That has been incredibly fun. We have met so many amazing leaders and entrepreneurs. Some of them are now part of our family. In addition to that, we have met all of these people, and we've created this brand and growth strategy for the company that is just building this tremendous momentum. What's cool too is we get to build a profitable company that is growing at a tremendous growth rate, but with really great economics underneath it.
Yeah.
That's been a really fun thing to build.
Yeah, and that has not been the norm, in times of abundance, and the last 8 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Most high growth businesses are cash burn businesses, right?
Right.
Not focusing on strong economics and outcomes, right? So you mentioned something here that I think is really important. A couple of concepts that I think are commonly missed, particularly in early stage founders or founders that have not raised before, right? And that is that partially fundraising is often a team sport, right?
Yes.
And that team extends beyond you and your executive team.
That's
or
right.
founding team. Oftentimes you need allies, partners, advisors. You need people on a board of directors or a board of
Yep.
advisors that are helping to open doors. So you mentioned that, and then you mentioned one of the strategies behind fundraising is not only getting capital you need to execute on growth strategies, but it's aligning with the people that have the capital so they can open more doors for you, right?
Exactly.
So those are really important, things I think that are often missed. And a lot of founders don't think about. They just think, well, I want a $5 million check for XYZ, and they may not even have a really great, idea of what they're going to do with that $5 million, right? But there's so much more to that, right?
That's right.
So
And it's an ecosystem of trust also, because you need the doors open, but you actually need people through the door with you. Because what they're doing is they've had relationships before, or they know these people before. And so they're in turn not just giving you credibility, but they're giving you this trust ecosystem, which is a very important
and you
accelerator.
can't burn their trust, right?
That's right.
Yeah. No, I mean, you have to deliver, as well as you can. And look, not every venture works, right? But
Absolutely.
yeah, when
Right.
people open doors, it's because they trust
That's right.
that you're going to have their back, right?
That's right. And you are going to be a good, open, honest, transparent partner. because it's also true when we build businesses. I always say there's a crisis every day. Like in every business that you ever build, you're like, what's the crisis happening today? Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. So you need these circles of support around you
Yeah.
in your team, in your investor, in your advisors that help you solve problems you might not have run into before, help you accomplish things that you have never done before. I've never run a company where we've done that many acquisitions.
Yeah.
So the only way that you get through that are a bunch of other people around you who have seen other issues they've run into, who can navigate that, who can say, oh, maybe you shouldn't do this, or we had this issue before, maybe you should change this. Because while you're constantly learning, you just hope you don't repeat the same mistakes other people knew you shouldn't make.
Yeah.
And that really requires this group of people that they know more than you do. They might know things that you don't know, and they're willing to help you build.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're going to execute 6 transactions in a year, you need people who have been there and done that. They can look around the corners for you and say, "Hey, Sid, here's some red flags you need to watch out for." Right? Here's some of the things that I learned in
Yeah.
executing 20 acquisitions or whatever. Right? I mean, there's so much to really kind of
But can I say
learn
just one
there.
thing on
Yes,
that? Because one
please.
thing I also want to reflect on is sometimes we have the mindset, and sometimes I even have thought that venture people on boards have said, well, we're only going to put people in the seats who have been there before because they can predict all of those things.
Mhm.
I also do not believe in that philosophy,
Yeah.
because you do need people who can give you advice, but sometimes people will feel that in their career development, like, oh, they're not going to put me in the seat because I've never done that before.
Yeah.
But you know what? All the people who did it first had also never done it before.
That is absolutely
So
true.
that's okay.
Yeah.
I really don't subscribe to the mentality that you can't have people do things they've never done before. I think what we really have to subscribe to are people who are critical problem solvers, they're creative thinkers, they're willing to go in and do all of the work, they're
They're
hungry
curious.
enough, they're curious
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
They're all of those things.
Yeah.
Those people will be far more successful than all of the people who can tell you all of the negative things that you might run into. Because you know what? Even if you run into them, it's really about how you solve the problems. It's not the problems you hit, it's how you handle the problems that you have.
100%. And the reality is, look, if you've been through 50 transactions, 50 acquisitions, every single one is different.
That's right.
At Nexus, between Nexus and Intellitex, who we just merged with, we've done 7 transactions in the last decade. Not 6 in a year, right? But
Same.
but we've
Yes.
learned a lot of lessons, and you build a playbook, and you think you have the
Yeah.
answers, and every single transaction brings different variables, and you learn new lessons.
That's right.
And sometimes those lessons smack you upside the head, right? And even when you have other people that have had more experience in those realms around you, that's so important. And oftentimes, look, we all get bored at times having done the same thing over and over
Sure.
again, and you get complacent, and you're just not maybe in the best place to be that hungry person who's really willing to innovate and learn. You've talked about multiple times, what I refer to oftentimes as experimentation, or you refer to as test and optimization, an agile method, right? And look, in business, it's funny because so often people look at founders or leaders and think you have all the answers, right? And more often than not, I'm like, I may have 5% of the answers at best, right? What business is really about is experimenting,
That's right.
learning, and optimizing based upon your learnings, right? And having leaders who are willing to have that type of abundance or growth mindset. And we're going to talk about this from a little bit different angle here in a minute, but um, that is really one of the keys to successful organizations are leaders who consistently and look, if you study some of the greatest organizations in the world, you study the Googles of the world, they have a culture of experimentation, right? What are we messing with, right? And what are the results we're getting out of that? How are we retooling it? How are we improving it, right? What are we ditching, right? Because it's just not
Right.
it's not creating the outcomes we want it to create, right? um, very interesting stuff there. I know we want to talk a little bit about blue sky mentality, right? Blue
Yeah.
sky mindset. Um, so I think this is a term or an ideology that a lot of people aren't super familiar with,
Sure.
right? So let's talk a little bit about what that means to you and how that's played a really pivotal role in your career and the success that you've been able to create and along the way.
Yeah. interestingly enough, the blue sky mindset is also tied to this idea of, I call it product validation or validation. Early in my career, I spent a whole series of my career on just learning product validation, and it's really informed things. But the blue sky mindset, so I had an opportunity a few years ago to spend about 6 years at Disney. And my journey and pathway into working at Disney was completely unique. So, when I had been an early executive, had been CMO and I owned all of product. And I had a really good friend and colleague who was the CTO at the time. And he was, a PhD in computational biophysics, like the smartest guy I know. And he got tapped to go into Disney and had this research arm that when they had acquired Pixar, Ed thought that they needed a really great innovation arm that was focused on technology challenges the Disney company would face over the next decade. And so Tom had gone for a couple of years, and I was coming off a company trying to figure out what I should do next, my common theme. And Tom's like, "Hey, Sid, come down and talk to us because what we need are entrepreneurs who have a really strong technology background that can come figure out which ones of these technology innovations we can make businesses out of, make the business, and spin them into business units." I'm like, "Well, that sounds really interesting." Now, this was a new thing at Disney. And so when I jumped in and took this job, my offer was literally like, "He said, we don't know exactly how long this might last for, if it's a good idea, like where it's going to go, anything about what it might be 3 months, could be longer, but you should totally come do this."
Yeah. Yeah.
And it took me like 5 seconds and I jumped in. And as I jumped into Disney, which was an amazing experience, which you could talk about on its own, there was a group inside of Disney called the Blue Sky Group. And the Blue Sky Group was their entire job was to think about the art of the possible. What would be possible if we did this? How could we transform guest experience if we did this inside of a ride or a performance or an entertainment moment or a property or even television or studios? Just what would happen? And how could this transform a relationship between those? And so I loved this Blue Sky Group because they got to think big. And at Disney, the term for validation is play testing. Also, I just love that term because everyone should be able to play test. Like take this idea and you just go play test it. And we would at Disney, we would create infrastructure that you will never have seen and no one will ever see in warehouses where we're like, "Well, I don't know what would be possible. Let's go try it. And let's go put it in this experience and then let's play test it and see what happens." And they just had this mentality of there were no limits. And so when you step back and you talk about the term blue sky, it's not blue today because it's snowing, but when you step out and you look at a blue sky, if next time you should do that, you should look up. When you look at a blue sky, what you notice is there are no limits. There's nothing that obstructs your view.
It's
You can
infinite.
see forever.
Yeah.
And so if you can see forever, what if you have that mentality in business? Because when we go to build businesses, we already know every constraint that holds something back. You go to solve a problem, you're like, "Oh, don't have the budget, don't have the resource, already tried that. This failed." And so we create these constraint-driven environments
Yeah.
that we already said no to everything because we forgot that we could solve problems without limits. And when you put yourself in a mindset of, okay, there's no limits, there's no budget crisis today, there's no talent gap, there's no technology that we haven't solved, just wonder if we could do it. What would happen if we could do that? So this blue sky mindset for me came out of observing what was happening in a blue sky team whose entire job was dedicated to these amazing ideas that could transform experience. What happens if that's our mindset in growing businesses, in our own personal lives, in our career development? What if there's no limits? All the things that hold us back inside of our own minds, most often,
Pretty much.
what becomes possible?
Yeah.
And that became for me this foundation of problem solving, opportunity, the way I looked at opportunities, the way I evaluate priorities in my life. Like, get rid of those limits. Like, just go to the limitless place. Eventually, I'll have to get back to constraints. But if this is the end thing I want, how do I make it possible?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's so cool. And having that experience of being able to go do that with Disney, right?
Mhm.
And get an inside view of this blue sky, a blue sky group, right? The one of the terms we use at Nexus IT is, and this is something a mentor taught me, I don't know, 15 or 18 years ago. Um, Always ask the question, if it were possible, how would we do it, right?
Yeah.
It's that art of the impossible, right? And that's just it. Like, as human beings, we inherently have limited beliefs, right?
That's right.
And we impose those limited beliefs on businesses and we constrain them, right? Um, And of course, that's, most founders are on some sort of journey to get rid of their own limiting beliefs.
Right.
Most founders and leaders, because they literally are shackling the business, right? And I've been on that that journey myself. Um, it's so important to kind of get past that. Well, let's not make any excuses. Let's not. Let's forget about the variables for a moment that are constraints.
That's right.
Um, and let's ask ourselves, if it were possible, how would we do it?
Yep.
Okay, and then maybe you bring back in the constraints and say,
Sure.
okay, now what do we do with the constraints? How does that play a role, and how do we get rid of those constraints? Because
They're
money
real.
money is not infinite,
That's right.
right? Time is not infinite. Talent is not infinite, right? So those are real things you have to deal with as a leader. Um, but when you ideate beyond those, um, and then you reintroduce those and begin to figure out how you deal with those variables and still create the art of the possible, right?
That's right.
um, so cool, and so much to learn there. Thank you, Sid. I really love that. I'm taking notes for my own learnings here, as well as being able to kind of re-express those. So um, let's delve deeper into this blue sky mindset and how that's shown up for you now, at Brandless, and what that's meant, again, in this 18-month time frame of raising $118 million, acquiring 6 companies, going from low 8 figures into, 9 figures of revenue. How has that helped you? How's that helped your team? How has it shown up?
That's a really great question. When I reflect on how it shows up inside of Brandless, and we talk about these large number of acquisitions and all of the work that comes with that, I think one of the approaches that our team consistently takes is how you create growth. Okay, let's go create the growth and let's just go after it. It's almost this, it's you kind of talked about it a little bit. I call it activation, this ability to take ideas and turn them into action, which I think is also part of how you execute on this blue sky mindset. I think you have to be willing to say there are inevitably problems and constraints that will come, but we're trying to get to this North Star. And that's that North Star we're going after. And every problem that comes up, we're going to take it down. And we're just going to be willing to just imagine that that is the very best place that we should be. And we're going to do that. And we're just going to execute against that. I think it shows up in a couple of ways: how you think about how you structure leadership, how you think about how you empower people to create alignment with you so that they too feel like we're driving towards this. It's been an interesting process as we've done that, because as an organization, we have a team completely focused on M&A, and companies that align with us in our ecosystem. We have our business units, which are fully operations. We have synergy teams that are fully operations. So you have this cross-functional ecosystem that you're building, and you need every one of those groups to just think about, there are no limits. How fast could we grow this company? What are the things, like, if we could get this division this big, what would that mean for us? And then just be willing to execute. I think so much of it comes down to your ability to turn ideas into action.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Because I believe there's very few ideas that other people haven't had. What you really have to have is the ability to get in motion.
It's the horsepower.
It's the horsepower. And then I try to reflect that in certain ways. As you were talking, it was making me think of an experience a couple of years ago when we had started a company called 3D Plus Me. And we could make you Iron Man. That was, we had built a 3D printing platform. We scanned your face. And we had partnerships with all the big content guys. And we created a partnership between Marvel, Hasbro, and Target to launch into Targets for the fall. And this was requiring a really massive install going into the holiday season so that people could become a Star Wars character or a Marvel character. We had all this infrastructure done. We had all the technology done. And the install required a certain part from a partner. And the partner had been committed with us for like 6 months. They were completely embedded in what we were doing. And 2 weeks before our first install, they called me on a Friday night at 5 and they said, "Hey, Sid, we don't think we're going to meet your timeline. We're backing out."
Ooh, ouch.
And, we had taken us 6 months to get all those agreements in place. I mean, high expectations, really big partners that were depending on us to deliver. And it was a critical moment for the company. I was like, "Okay, what are we going to do?" So Monday morning, I came in and I pulled the team in and I said, "Okay, here's the deal. I might be asking the impossible, but can we brainstorm every possible solution to this problem? Like, anything's on the table. What could we do to possibly still hit our install date, knowing we've got this huge gap? And at the end of the day, we might not be able to, but let's just come up with it." So on the whiteboard, we listed like 30 things, and there are all sorts of crazy things. We're like, well, let's make that phone call. Who do we know here? Okay, do this, do this, do this. We started taking them down. The end of the day, we missed our install by 1 day.
Wow.
And it did take 150 family members and every possible contact that we ever knew. I mean, I was sharing pictures with someone a couple of weeks ago about that one of the final weekend where, this warehouse is full of stuff. We're packing into this trailer to get it down, the semi truck to get it to Target in time for the installs. It was completely crazy, but there was a mindset that said, you're right, this might be impossible. And you might be crazy, said, that's okay.
Yeah.
But we're willing to do all of the pathways, and some of them aren't going to work and some of them will. I think that's what you're trying to infuse. You're trying to say there's something amazing we can accomplish. It's what the dream is of every entrepreneur. I can change the world. But to change the world, it means you have to remember you can change the world and then start taking down those. And you need your team to be willing to go with you on that journey.
Yeah. You talk about empowering people, creating alignment, right? That's really, I think, where the pack separates on good leaders and extraordinary leaders, right? Because good leaders can build on their own, right? But you can only get so far building on your own.
That's right.
Yeah. What's the saying? You want to go fast, build alone. You want to go far, build together, right? And
you want to make an impact.
Yes,
you should go together.
Go together. Yeah, 100%. And when you build a business past a certain point, look, it's no longer in my hands, right?
Yep.
It's absolutely the ability of team members to align with vision and to execute, right, on that vision. A thought comes to mind. And again, looking from the outside, oftentimes people think that entrepreneurship, and leadership is illustrious, and you do nothing but go to galas and parties and receive awards and be in the media, right? And show up on podcasts. What they don't know is that it is an absolute relentless onslaught of problems.
That's right.
All the time. Never stops, right? It doesn't matter how long you've done the business, how long you've been running it, how fine-tuned the business is. Variables change all the time.
That's right.
And things come up. Let's talk a little bit about not only blue sky mindset, but this mindset around how you view challenges, obstacles, problems, and then what you do to get through those, right? Tell me a little bit about what that means in your career and you as a leader, maybe.
Yeah, like I said, I really do believe there's a crisis every day. And as you build companies and as you step into leadership, your number one problem is actually problem solving. What your job really is to remove the roadblocks for other people. The roadblocks that come up, the place you spend 99, well, you pretend you have 200% of your time, but you spend so much of your time just taking down roadblocks for people, because if you can remove roadblocks and be their thought leader partner on solving those, they go faster and they get more accomplished along the way. I think I really come from a place of there's always a solution. The end result might not be what you thought it was today, but there is always a path through. Now, sometimes you get thrown curveballs with really crazy people or circumstances that you could never have imagined that you're in, that requires more difficult navigation. But it really comes down to attitude. Do you believe that you can put your energy and options will come? And I guess my philosophy is, if you're doing the right things for your stakeholders, if you're aligned in the things that are going to create great outcomes from people, and you are transparent and open and honest in your communication with all of the stakeholders that you need to help you solve problems, you will get through all of those hard things. And you really just have to believe that you will. Right? The problems that come, if you don't believe that you will solve them, if you don't believe that you can architect the path through, no one else around you will believe that either. So you have to just be willing to know that your job as an entrepreneur is problem solving. And your job for that is to make the people around you remove their roadblocks, help them solve them, and put them in a position where they can be super successful while you handle the challenges and the navigation of all of those problems that come every day.
Yeah. No, that is so true, right? What is sometimes sayings escape me.
Yes.
There's a saying, luck is the intersection of hard work and opportunity, or something like that, right?
And timing. Yeah.
And timing, is that what it is? Yeah.
I can't remember, but it's exactly. Yes, I know
right
what you're talking
there.
about.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that for me is, you talk about just do the work, right?
Yep.
You believe that the things that you need for the solution will come into your path, um, as long as you're doing the work and you're doing the work the right way. You talk
Mhm.
about, and this is one thing that I think, again, a lot of people misunderstand, or they perhaps don't deliver on, and that is creating aligned outcomes for all your stakeholders, right?
Yes,
And that's not just shareholders, not just founders. It's your clients, it's your people, your
that's right.
team, it's the community around you. It's why leaders like you, leaders like myself, we engage in the community around us because we're helping. We try to help. We think we're trying to help.
That's right.
To lift the ecosystem around us, right? And so and look, I can't tell you how many times in my own career where there's been really difficult circumstances in front of us, right?
Yeah,
And you think you know how you're going to get through it. You may not have any idea, but you just start getting to work and trying to really intentionally make sure you're producing the right outcomes for everybody involved, even those outcomes might be really challenging. And
yeah,
and candidly, look, there are a lot of businesses around us, a lot of leaders right now that are dealing with some very, very difficult
that's right.
situations, and that's beginning to impact all of us throughout a hyper connected ecosystem, right? Um, and this is the time where our metals tested as leaders, right? Where our ability to solve problems, or our willingness to solve those problems, um, to eliminate those roadblocks for our people,
Yeah,
and to really trust in the process that obviously you have to craft good strategy, and you
absolutely.
have
All
to
the
back it up
basics.
with data and all that kind of stuff, right? But then you have to trust in the execution, and that the things you need to get you through will be there, right? And that's happened for me so many times, and oftentimes those things you need are people that
Yeah,
just happen to come across your pathway. And look, and this is maybe silly, but there's been multiple times in my career where I've been brought to tears because um, there's a situation that I'm just like, we're bumping our heads and we're bumping our heads and we're trying so hard, um, and suddenly somebody shows up that
yeah,
is like, you just need to tweak like 5 degrees that way and do
right.
do this little thing, and candidly, I mean, there's those situations where it's just like, oh my gosh, thank you so much, right? So um, we only have a few minutes left here as we wind down, Sid. I do want to I want to key in on kind of a final topic,
Sure.
and I think that it lends really well to this blue sky mindset, and then problem solving, right? And having this, and look, if you're thinking about being an entrepreneur, or you've dove into that, right? Uh, Understand your job is to solve problems, right?
That's
You
right.
you will, if you don't like problems, entrepreneurship is probably not for you. Leadership is probably not for you. Um, if you like to have challenges and you like to figure out those challenges, it's a very good career to choose. Um, you've focused in on, in that process, being fearless, and this is candidly, this is, for most of us, this can be crippling. And I know
Yeah,
that at times in my career it has been as well. Um, Most of us grow up, in some sort of societal realm where we're instilled with limiting beliefs that revolve around fear. And it takes time to shed, those limiting beliefs and that fear from you, right? And particularly, I mean, look, I know a lot of founders right now who are going through a lot of fear
yep,
because the economy's tanking
yeah. The
around
market
us.
conditions. Yep.
Yeah, market conditions are tough right now, right? And there's a lot of fear, and a lot of blood in the water, right? Tell us a little bit about what being fearless is and how that's helped you in your career.
So I don't think being fearless means you don't have fear. I think it's the approach of how you get through the fear. Because there's always things that we're like, oh, what happens if we go here? Or what is the outcome of this? I think we also, as entrepreneurs, look at other entrepreneurs and we're like, that person is fearless. Look at everything they've done. They've done such an amazing job. How come I'm not more like that? There's a lot of reflection around those because you look at people who have raised or who have had these really amazing outcomes like, "Oh, I gotta walk in those steps." But when you think about it's about showing up in the moments that are the toughest. And at the end of the day, the thing that you're really faced with is, what's the worst thing that could happen if I don't go do this? Most oftentimes, showing up to do the thing you're most afraid of either gives you more information, it helps you solve the next problem, or it gives you the answer you need to know what to do next. Because when you're solving problems, you need options. When you're solving problems, you're looking for this set of optionality that says, these are the types of things that could be possible. But if you're not willing to step in, in those legal negotiation classes, right? It's always about your best alternative to the negotiated agreement. If you don't show up and ask someone, you do not have an answer. If you don't show up, and most people want to help people, but if you don't ask anyone, you'll never get to the answer. So fear holds us back from asking because we predict all the things that could happen versus stepping into the space, showing up, asking for the deal. A couple of years ago, I was negotiating a really large deal. It was like a $15 million deal. And I was working with the president of a Fortune 10 company. And the deal wasn't working for us. Like, we had been working on the deal, but we were losing money in the structure that we had created. And I had to restructure the deal. You step back, and that's kind of like, it's a big thing,
That's
right?
yeah,
I'm like,
that's
I'm walking into this room, I'm restructuring a deal. It could wipe out the entire thing if we don't align. But the flip side of that is, if I'm too afraid to go ask because it might potentially do something, well, it was already going to not work out for us anyway, because we couldn't spend the money, and then we were going to miss expectations and not to deliver anyway. So I had to walk into the room and say, look, help me solve this. I think a lot of accomplishing fear is also your approach on the other side, the way that you take the conversations on, the way that you're willing to show up. But at the end of the day, everything in the whole entire world is about how you show up.
yeah,
It's about stepping into the place where you're willing to ask the questions, you're willing to take on the problems, you're willing to find solutions, and you're willing to help other people. If you're willing to do those things, then you can still be afraid of the moments, but fear doesn't hold you back from taking action.
yeah. So often we predetermine the outcomes of conversations that we assume that we know how the other party is going to respond,
That's right.
and we psych ourselves out.
That's
And
right.
we've already we've already gone there in our minds, and we know this just isn't going to work, right? And it's so important, like you said, when you don't know what the pathway forward is, show up,
That's right.
start asking the questions, start figuring out potential ways forward, right?
Exactly.
So
And can I just acknowledge
yeah,
that it is also emotionally difficult,
yeah,
right? There are moments where you don't know how you're going to solve something in front of you, or you're presented with, the economic climate of today that might feel Herculean in its effort to get through. And I have a recognition that those also take this personal tour. There was a moment when I was doing this fundraise, and I felt like I was getting so many no's that I couldn't even look at my email, or like answer any of those emails before I got, because it was too hard. But I also had all these people relying on me to show up and figure out any of the pathways forward. And life is going to be full of both opportunity and failure. And not all of our companies are going to work out the exact way that we want. But if you show up the right way and you explore all of those paths through the midst of that fear, and through the midst of which is most definitely hard, both emotionally and physically and
yeah,
mentally
yeah,
to us.
100%.
But if you show up to those, then even if it's a failure, you did everything that you needed to do to get to the outcome, and there will be something else that happens on the outcome of that if you've done everything you could possibly do.
Yeah, of course.
Even if it means you end up closing the door of a company and having to move on, which is a really crappy thing to have to do.
Yeah,
But if you've done everything possible, then you did what you needed to
yeah.
do, and you can find the next thing
Yeah,
and
well,
learn
you
from
can
that.
feel good about what you did, first of all. Those are hard situations, but you can feel good because you've done everything within your power, right?
That's right.
And two other people will see that. And as you mentioned, you'll have other opportunities. Look, these gray hairs in my beard, they don't come from yeah, they definitely come from hitting lots of bumps in the road,
That's
right?
right.
And trying to figure those out. And then yes, the toll, and that's a reality. The toll on leaders, on entrepreneurs, it goes well beyond what you might see in the office, right? And the calm demeanor that sometimes you have to maintain. um, you know uh, we're most of the time we're reeling inside. There's so much happening emotionally and mentally and psychologically, and it's not just 8 to 5 at the office.
That's
It's
right.
pretty much around the clock, and you have to figure out how you show up for your family at the same time
That's
while
right.
you're in the midst of crisis and chaos and all
That's
these
right.
crazy
Which is
things.
why priorities really lead, right? You have to have the priorities you're willing to manage everything around.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got just really just a few seconds left. Sid, any final kind of thoughts you want to share with the guests before we wrap up here?
I think my final thought would go back to something we talked a little bit earlier, which is you really just do have time and your talent. And everyone should be asking their question at every stage of our career. Are we using those two things that we have to make the people around us better, our communities, our families, and any place that we can touch? And that's what we're building as entrepreneurs is we're trying to make a difference. But I also think that's our individual question about where we choose to spend our time and how we choose to show up every day.
Yeah, no, such a great point. Sid, this has been an enlightening hour, at least. If you haven't watched this live, we'll definitely try to get this in front of a lot of people, throughout, many different mediums over the coming weeks and months. This has been a really good segment. It's been very valuable for me. I know it's been very valuable for those that joined us this hour. I appreciate your time. You are one of the warriors that is doing really extraordinary things here in Utah, and your impact is felt well beyond Utah and seen well beyond Utah. You're an extraordinary person, extraordinary leader. I feel very honored that you would accept the invitation to come on TechBeat today. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time to share your talents with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really am honored to do it. And I love that you're creating these conversations. I think they're so important for the community.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Sid. We're going to go ahead and sign off. So thank you all for joining us on TechBeat. Remember, we got some really great guests coming up in the coming weeks and months. So look out for announcements on those. We'll talk to y'all later.